Before I start, I want to make this clear. I love Advance Wars. I've played every single game in the series, from the first one to Reboot Camp. But Advance Wars Days of Ruin is easily my favorite game in the series. Its dark aesthetic, with its good story unlike the other entries in the series, and the new changes in gameplay, made me fall in love with it from the very start. But first, what is Advance Wars? I am Soren, and here I am to explain why playing Advance Wars Days of Ruin wouldn't ruin your day. Even though there are multiple entries before what we can call the first Advance Wars game, like Famicom Wars, this series started on the Game Boy Advance on the 10th of September of 2001. Its colorful aesthetic, charismatic characters, and pretty nice music, all things considered, made it a pretty nice experience, but it could be pretty challenging at first. In the game, you control armies of ground units like tanks and infantry, air units like helicopters, and naval units like submarines. The people who played it loved the game, especially the Western audience, and Intelligent Systems didn't take too much time to release a sequel, Advance Wars 2 Black Hole Rising, which continued the story of the previous game, refining it, and making it the fan favorite even to this day. Now, even if the game improved the gameplay of the first Advance Wars, it was criticized for being more of the same. Gameplay wise, some characters were nerfed or buffed, a lot of characters were added, and there was a new unit, but at the end of the day, there wasn't much of a difference. In the next game, Advance Wars Dual Strike, Intelligent Systems tried to be more experimental. They allowed you to change characters in the middle of the battle instead of having to stick with the same guy in their mission. They added more ground units, more air units, more naval units, they added more characters, and even more climate changes to spice up the battle. But the critics repeated the same stuff. It was more of the same. And this time it was also criticized because of its weird pseudo 3D style, looking weird and unpleasant for the eye. So it wasn't that good looking on the general public either, which made it to this day the most hated Advance Wars game. Seeing how the critics were with Dual Strike, the developers thought how could they make something the people could enjoy without making it the exact same thing, like a surprise. So, in order to finally achieve that, they discarded everything that the previous entries had shown story-wise. They wanted to start from zero, and honestly, it was a really good choice. The story in other games was simple at best and non-existent at worst. If someone told you that the plot of games would be that the bad guys are attacking you, and you realize and you had to defeat them, they would be right. It was literally it. For the new story, they chose to make something darker, and not nearly as light-hearted, but still with some sense of humor to appease the Western audience, who enjoyed the Advance Wars series much more than Japanese. They also took some inspiration from Advance Wars Sisters, Fire Emblem, in both story and gameplay, trying to bridge both series, which sadly didn't work as well as intended. Before starting, I should point out that I'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum, so don't worry if you want to experience the story yourself. You should, by the way. The game's story starts with a cutscene, showing us how the Earth we all know and love has received the impact of lots of meteor strikes, causing the majority of living species to die. And those who survive have to deal with awful conditions, like no sunlight at all and a sky totally covered in ash. Yeah, what a great start! The first character we meet in the game is the cadet in training, Ed, one of the survivors of the meteor strike. Now, before continuing, I should mention that the American and European versions of the game had pretty different names for the characters. I played the European versions, so I'll use the European name. Sorry, Will fans. Ed had tried to hide in his military academy, but he had to come out because there was no food left there. However, he was attacked by bandits of the wasteland once he came out, who tried to steal everything from him, including his life. Luckily, he was saved by the two other protagonists in the story, Captain O'Brien, an idealistic man who has devoted his life since the meteor strike to save the people in need, and Lynn, his second in command, who's much colder but always speaks with the truth. In this story, Air and company will have to meet the worst things that could come out from a post-apocalyptic world. Bandits, a world created by a power-hungry fool, cults made of the biggest possible despair, crazy scientists, and even an extremely deadly, man-made virus that could easily kill anyone that has it if not treated carefully. Now, I would like to go in detail, but it's hard to do so without spoiling lots of important points. Like I mentioned before, the story does have a sense of humor instead of being totally dark and edgy, and its characters, both enemies and allies, are pretty charismatic. But even having that in mind, the game does an excellent job of reminding you of the despair of the situation, which makes like moments matter a lot more, and the worst moments makes you feel bad. I can't really say it works most of the time, because sadly some characters can be pretty light or dark. There are just a few who we can't really consider that they are on a grey area, which is a huge missed opportunity. However, does that stop them from being good and likable characters? Of course not! Even with that problem, they never stop having their own distinct personality and great moments in the story. The only complaint I have with the story is that it's really focused on the protagonist. Some secondary characters lack a real time to shine, and it's a shame, because I feel like the general audience would like them more if they were more present. And it's not like we can have them talk because of the permadeath situation in Fire Emblem, for example. They will always be present, which makes the problem far more odd. I would really like to mention the pacing, because even if it starts pretty slow, it does a wonderful job at having a good pace most of the time. Once the tutorial section is gone, the conflicts never feel like they are there for more time than they should. Neither do they feel short enough to be annoying. And I'm honestly surprised by how well they pulled it off, especially knowing how lackluster the Advance Wars stories have been. Even if I can't talk too much about the story, because I would be spoiling you, which I don't want to, you should at least give it a chance. And if you don't want to play it yourself, or you just suck at strategy games, you could at least check it out on YouTube. Really, it's really good. Oh boy, I've been waiting for this. I'll be honest with you, I absolutely love the gameplay on Ace of Rain. You've been seeing the gameplay in this video's background, and I'm sure that even though you probably don't know much about Ace of Rain, you've been able to understand what's going on. Let's start with the basics. And that's the units that you can build. There are 3 different sets of units: ground units, air units, and naval units. And I will show you what every single last one of them can do. Let's start with air units. Air units can fly. It's pretty obvious. That means that they ignore everything related to terrain, so they can go through the battlefield without any kind of problem. Of course, that means that they don't get any kind of terrain bonuses, but to be honest, that's a small price to pay. Bombers are extremely powerful units. They can't hit air units at all, but they're devastating against any ground or naval unit, doing amazing damage. Interceptors are beasts of air combat. They can only hit their units, so they aren't always useful, but they do lots of damage against any air unit in their way. In fact, the only thing that can counter an interceptor in the air is another interceptor. Fighters are cheaper than the other two, but they can attack any unit in the game. Their damage isn't that good compared to the others, and they struggle a lot against tank, so they aren't as useful. Battlecopters are even cheaper, and they do more damage to vehicles. However, battlecopters in air combat aren't really that good. The only thing they can hit are other helicopters, but they're very versatile. Transport copters are units that aren't suitable for combat, as they can't fight at all. They're support units. They can transport an infantry unit and carry them wherever they please. However, you have to be careful with them. If an infantry unit is inside a transport copter and the transport copter dies, the infantry unit will also die. It sounds obvious, but it's really important sometimes to remember. Naval units can only move in the sea, but they have certain importance on the battlefield. Battleships are indirect units with a huge range that can hit naval and ground units. However, what makes them special is that they can move and shoot in the same turn, making them really dangerous. Carriers are interesting units. They can deal damage to just air units, but it's not high damage. However, what's important with them is that they can craft up to 4 ship planes, which can attack any unit in the game, doing medium to big damage. However, they have low amounts of fuel and ammo. Fortunately, carriers can carry any air unit in the game, so these planes can load on them, making them regain fuel in the next turn. Submarines are the key of naval combat. They can just attack naval units, and they're really good at it! Except when they're fighting a cruise, more than later. That's not the interesting part about them though. As subs, they can hide in the water, which makes them invisible from the enemy. They will not be able to locate them, so they will probably be ambushed. Even air units. Yeah, this game is weird. Cruisers can do lots of stuff. They do medium damage to most naval units, except subs and missile boats, which they can almost one-shot. They can also attack air units, doing amazing damage, especially against helicopters. And not only that, but they can carry up to 2 helicopters, making them pretty versatile units to have. Missile units are weird. They're really cheap, but they have only 1 shot before they have to be charged more. The damage they deal isn't bad, but they usually take a lot of damage in return. They can also be used as support units, as one infantry unit can go inside them. Landers cannot fire them. It's another unit meant for support. Like missile boats, they can carry infantry, but they can also carry any ground unit in the game, up to 2 different units. Most units in the game are ground units, and the gameplay usually revolves around them. Infantry units can capture cities, a very important thing, since cities provide you money to make more units. Combat-wise, they are not that good. They can attack helicopters, but they aren't good with it. Same with vehicles, but they do good damage against all infantry. Bazooka units, however, can actually deal lots of damage against vehicles. Missiles are indirect units that can only target their units. They're extremely good at it though, being able to kill air units without any kind of problem, but positioning them can be really hard. Tanks are your main damage dealers, and the bigger they are, the more damage they will deal, and the 3 tanks that are in the game work the same, just bigger. They're good against every ground unit in the game that isn't the ISO tank, but I feel like the name alone explains the reason. They can also attack battlecopters, but they're not that good at it. However, unlike tanks, they are amazing at handling air units, like the name would suggest. Being able to easily destroy or leave several wounds in all of them. They're not good against other vehicles though. Indirect units are really close in how they all work. Artillery units have attacks at range and do decent damage with both ground and naval units. Rockets, compared to artillery, have a larger maximum range and a lower minimum, while doing more or less a bit more damage. Anti-tanks are a bit more expensive than artillery, while they have the same range. However, they're able to counter at close combat, making them amazingly good against tanks thanks to the high distance. However, neither of the artillery, rockets, or anti-tanks can move and shoot in the same turn. That's a privilege that only battleships have. Now, depending on the character you control in combat, you'll have different advantages. If one of your units is in your base or your HQ, you'll be able to put him in a unit. Let's use Ed as an example here. He makes a power aura? CO aura? I don't know, let's just call it an aura. All units within that aura will have a slightly better defense and offense. However, all characters will have different effects. Ed here gives all ground direct attackers an extra 20% attack boost, making them even better. Not only that, but his own unit will always get a 20% increase in attack and defense, which stacks with the other effects. But that's a thing that every character does. Putting a character on a unit will cost half of that unit's rating cost. Every time the commander or a unit in the aura attacks, a gauge will increase. If it reaches the half point, the aura will reach longer, and if it's full, the aura's range will increase again, and the character will be able to use his exclusive CO power, which is huge! Using CO powers not only gives you a huge effect during that turn, but it makes every single unit in Battlefield have that aura's effect, which can totally change the battle. However, you should be very careful. If your CO unit gets targeted and killed, the gauge will go back to 0 and you'll have to build it up. Now, with how much I've spoken about the units in the game, you think it's complicated. But is it really? If you make memory, I'm sure that you'll be able to remember what the units can do, at least most of them. In reality, there is a lot of stuff in combat, but it never feels too complex. Even while having to know how everything works in order to have a good army, a novice player will never feel overwhelmed, as not only is it intuitive, but the game does an excellent job at teaching you the basics. The most complicated thing you have to do is knowing where to move. To finish this segment, I would like to add that there are a total of 12 characters in the game, which you can unlock progressing through the story. When you think of a strategy game, the first thing that usually comes to mind are the units and the maps you're playing. And Days of Ruin map design is mostly pretty good. Mostly. In the campaign, you'll be able to go through 26 story maps, the first one big tutorials, and 38 trial maps, which can vary from puzzle-like maps to normal maps that have you fighting against up to 3 different characters. Now, even if the map design is solid, there is something that can make or break it, and that's the enemy AI. Fighting the defensive AI in Days of Ruin is probably one of the most miserable things in the game, and the worst maps have you fighting that kind of AI. To complete a map, you usually have to destroy all enemy units or capture the enemy HQ. But in the story, there will be some maps that will have you do other objectives to win, like having certain units reach a certain point. Maps will also have sometimes the dreaded Fog of War, which limits your visibility. However, in Days of Ruin, unlike most games with fog, the enemy won't be able to cheat. He will be playing the same rules as you. And thank God for that. Outside of the trial maps and story maps, you'll be able to play over 100 different maps, probably made to play with your friends on the DS. And now, even though you'll probably be emulating Days of Ruin, this is still a possibility. The game offers a local multiplayer that's still more than serviceable. And with the power of save states, you could play online, even if it could be a bit complicated. And if out of those 100 maps you don't like any of them, why don't you make them yourself, huh? No, seriously, why don't you? There's a map editor that you can use to make your own maps, up to 50! 50! There was no need to give so much freedom, yet they did! Now, after saying that, the multiplayer-only maps, even though they are mostly good, there are some of the most god-awful maps ever on the franchise that just don't make any sense. I like to think that the developers were drunk or having a laugh while making them. And now, regarding the another part of the design, I want to mention the character designs, which I found not very original because of the military aspect of the game, but I still consider them pretty good. And have you seen my body truck? Holy shit, his design is freaking amazing. Easily my favorite in all of Advance Wars. Now, we're nearing the end of the video, and I wanted to give you some extra information about the game that you may find interesting. The difficulty is nice, really well done. It isn't too easy and it isn't too hard. Although, if it's your first strategy game, or Advance Wars game in general, you'll have a tougher time. But you can always improve to get better, so don't really worry about that. I find the music really good as well, one of the strongest points of the title. In fact, that's the music you've been hearing through the entire video, the Days of Ruin OST. The composer, Yoshito Hirano, has done lots of work in Italian systems. One of the most known being the Fire Tellius theology. And one last thing is that, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned a failure to bridge both Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, and there isn't a real proof of this. But I would say that the 15 years of waiting for the next Advance Wars game is more than enough to show it. Thanks for checking out this video. I really want to spread the word of this hidden piece of art of the Nintendo DS that I feel like the people should really know about. Days of Ruin is easily one of my favorite strategy games, and if you give it a chance, I really hope it becomes one of your favorite ones as well. Also, if you were wondering how the match ended, I got an S rank! Hell yeah!